Julia Hayes wiped her brow with the back of her hand, the kitchen steam fogging up her glasses as she leaned over to taste the béarnaise sauce simmering on the stove. Perfect. Rich, buttery, with just the right hint of tarragon. The small but bustling kitchen of Harvest, her farm-to-table restaurant in Portland, Oregon, was her sanctuary, a place where her creativity and passion flowed freely through her fingertips and into the dishes that were slowly building her reputation in the city's competitive culinary scene. "Order up! Table 7 needs the ribeye, medium rare, and the pan-seared salmon," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the clatter of pots and the sizzle of meat hitting hot pans. Her sous chef, Miguel, nodded without looking up from the delicate plating he was working on. Julia moved to grab the next ticket, her body awkwardly maneuvering between the prep station and the line. She felt the familiar tug of her chef's jacket, stretched tight across her chest and abdomen. At 34, Julia had watched her body expand over the years. Each pound gained a silent testament to countless taste tests, late-night comfort meals after grueling service hours, and the occupational hazard of loving food too much. She ignored the dull ache in her knees as she reached for a heavy pot. It had become her constant companion, along with the shortness of breath that plagued her after climbing the short flight of stairs to her apartment. But today, something else caught her attention, a sharp pain shooting through her lower back as she bent over. Julia winced, straightening up slowly as the pain subsided into a persistent throb. "You okay, chef?" Miguel asked, concern etched on his face. "Fine," Julia replied automatically, forcing a smile. "Just need to stretch more." But as the evening service wore on, Julia knew she wasn't fine. The pain returned with vengeance when she tried to lift a box of produce that had just been delivered. She stumbled, almost dropping it, saved only by Miguel's quick reflexes. "That's it," he said firmly, taking the box from her hands. "You need to sit down." Julia reluctantly complied, collapsing onto a stool in the corner of the kitchen, her breathing heavy and labored. Her white chef's coat was stained with sweat, and she could feel her face flushing with embarrassment. This wasn't the first time her body had betrayed her in front of her staff, but it was certainly the most humiliating. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Julia sat alone in her office, staring at the invitation that had arrived earlier that day. The Portland Culinary Festival, the city's premier food event, was accepting applications for featured chefs. It was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, a chance to showcase her restaurant on a larger stage, to possibly attract investors for the expansion she'd been dreaming about. But as she looked at her reflection in the small mirror on her desk, all she saw was a tired, overweight woman who could barely make it through a dinner service without needing to catch her breath. The festival was 6 months away. How could she represent her restaurant, stand for hours preparing and presenting food, when her body was already failing her? The next morning, against her better judgment, Julia stepped on the scale for the first time in years. The number that stared back at her, 267 pounds, made her stomach drop. When had it gotten this bad? She'd always been on the heavier side even as a child, but this was different. This was affecting her health, her business, her dreams. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and opened her calendar. Her doctor had been suggesting a consultation with a nutritionist and personal trainer for months. Julia had always politely declined, making excuses about her busy schedule. But now, staring at that number, she finally made the call. 2 days later, Julia found herself sitting in the sleek, modern reception area of Transform Fitness, clutching her medical referral like a lifeline. The walls were adorned with before and after photos of clients, their transformations ranging from subtle to dramatic. Julia averted her eyes, feeling like an imposter among the fit, lycra-clad clients coming and going through the doors. "Miss Hayes," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'm Raphael Morgan. I'll be your trainer." Julia looked up to see a tall man with dark hair cut close to his scalp, his posture military straight. His expression was serious, almost stern, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet intensity that made Julia sit up straighter despite herself. "Dr. Patel sent over your medical records," Raphael continued, gesturing for her to follow him into a small consultation room. "She's concerned about your blood pressure and the early signs of insulin resistance. I understand you're a chef?" The way he said chef made it sound like an accusation. Julia felt a flare of defensiveness. Yes, I own Harvest. We focus on local, sustainable cuisine. She lifted her chin slightly, a touch of pride cutting through her discomfort. Raphael nodded, making a note on his tablet. That explains some of the challenges we'll face. Your relationship with food is both professional and personal. It's going to complicate things. Food isn't my enemy, Julia replied, an edge to her voice. It's my livelihood, my passion. Raphael looked up, his expression unreadable. No, but right now it's killing you slowly. And that's what we need to address. His bluntness left Julia speechless. No one had ever put it so starkly before. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and inexplicably angry at this stranger who presumed to understand her life based on a few medical charts. Look, Raphael continued, his tone softening slightly. I'm not here to take away your passion. I'm here to help you find a way to live with it that doesn't compromise your health. You mentioned on your intake form that you're preparing for a culinary festival? Julia nodded, surprised he'd picked up on that detail. The Portland Culinary Festival. It's in 6 months. Then we have a deadline and a goal. Raphael opened a new page on his tablet. Let's start by understanding your current routine, your eating habits, and what's realistic for someone with your schedule. As Julia began to describe her typical day, the pre-dawn trips to the farmer's market, the long hours in the kitchen, the late-night taste tests and recipe development, she noticed Raphael listening intently, without judgment. He asked thoughtful questions, probing not just about what she ate, but why and how she felt afterward. By the end of the session, Julia had a preliminary plan: 3 training sessions per week, a gradual dietary adjustment focused on portion control rather than elimination, and daily check-ins via an app Raphael recommended. This isn't going to be easy, Raphael warned as they stood to conclude the meeting, especially given your profession. But if you're committed, I believe you can make significant progress by the festival. Julia hesitated, then extended her hand. I'm committed. But I need you to understand something. I won't give up who I am. Food is my art, my expression. I need to find a way to be healthier without losing that. Raphael took her hand, his grip firm. That's exactly what we're going to do. See you Thursday at 7 a.m. Wear comfortable clothes and be prepared to work. As Julia left the gym, she felt a curious mixture of dread and hope. The mountain ahead seemed impossibly steep, but for the first time in years she could envision a path forward, a way to reclaim her body without sacrificing her soul. The alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. and Julia groaned into her pillow. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she forced herself to sit up. It had been 3 weeks since her first session with Raphael, and the novelty of her new routine had long since worn off, leaving only the grinding reality of early mornings, sore muscles, and constant hunger. She shuffled to the bathroom, wincing at the sight of her reflection. The scale showed she'd lost 7 pounds, but looking in the mirror, Julia couldn't see any difference. She still saw the same struggling chef, now with dark circles under her eyes from exhaustion. At precisely 7 a.m., Julia pushed open the door to Transform Fitness, her water bottle clutched in one hand, her resolve wavering with each step. Raphael was already waiting, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable as always. "You're 3 minutes late," he noted, checking his watch. "Good morning to you too," Julia muttered, dropping her bag on a nearby bench. "Had to park 3 blocks away." Raphael didn't acknowledge her sarcasm. "We'll start with a 15-minute warm-up on the treadmill, then move to resistance training. I've adjusted your program based on your progress." Julia bit back a retort and trudged toward the treadmill. This was their routine now, his clinical instructions, her reluctant compliance, both of them pretending not to notice how much she struggled with even the most basic exercises. Halfway through the session, as Julia attempted her 3rd set of modified push-ups, her arms gave out and she collapsed onto the mat, breathing heavily. "Get up," Raphael said, his voice maddeningly calm. "2 more." "I can't," Julia panted, rolling onto her back. "I literally can't." "Yes, you can. Your muscles aren't failing. Your mind is giving up first." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the lack of empathy, snapped something in Julia. She pushed herself up to sitting position, face flushed with exertion and anger. "You have no idea what this is like for me," she said, her voice low but intense. "You've probably never been overweight a day in your life. You don't understand what it's like to have your body fight against you, to feel trapped inside yourself." Raphael's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "You're right. I don't know what that's like." But I do know what it's like to lose everything you've worked for in an instant. He gestured to his left leg. ACL tear, 6 years ago. I was training for the Olympic trials in decathlon. One wrong landing, and it was over. Julia stared at him, momentarily silenced by this unexpected glimpse into his life. The difference is, Raphael continued, I couldn't change what happened to me. You can change what's happening to you. So yes, I push you hard. Because you can do this, Julia. But only if you believe it too. For the first time since they'd met, Julia really looked at Raphael, not as the drill sergeant making her life miserable, but as a person with his own story, his own disappointments. She saw the faint scar on his knee, the way he sometimes shifted his weight when standing for too long. Without another word, Julia got back into position and completed the last 2 push-ups, her arms shaking but holding. Later that afternoon, as Julia prepped for dinner service at Harvest, she found herself thinking about Raphael's revelation. It explained so much about his approach, the rigid discipline, the focus on form and technique, the underlying belief that the body could be mastered through sheer force of will. "Chef, the new menu draft?" Miguel prompted, interrupting her thoughts. Julia blinked, refocusing on the papers in front of her. The Portland Culinary Festival Committee had requested a preliminary menu for her showcase. Traditionally, this would be the moment for a chef to pull out all the stops, rich, indulgent dishes designed to impress. But as Julia reviewed her initial ideas, she felt a strange disconnect. How could she serve butter-drenched lobster and cream-laden risotto when she herself was counting every calorie? How authentic would her presentation be if she couldn't fully embrace her own creations? On impulse, Julia crumpled the draft and started fresh. What if, instead of fighting against her new lifestyle, she incorporated it into her culinary vision? What if she created dishes that honored both her love of food and her commitment to health? By the time dinner service began, Julia had outlined a new concept, Mindful Harvest, a menu that celebrated the natural flavors of local ingredients without relying on excessive fats and sugars. It was a risk, a departure from the comfort food that had built her reputation, but it felt right. That evening, as the kitchen hummed with activity, Julia noticed something different. She moved more easily between stations, her back pain less pronounced. When a server called out sick at the last minute, Julia stepped in to help on the floor, navigating the crowded dining room without the usual shortness of breath. These were small victories, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Julia they felt monumental. For the first time, she began to believe that perhaps Raphael was right. Perhaps she could change her story. The next morning, Julia arrived at the gym 5 minutes early, a small but deliberate choice. Raphael noticed immediately, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I've been thinking," Julia said, as they began her warm-up. "The festival menu. I want to create something that reflects this journey." "Not diet food," she added quickly, seeing his expression, "but dishes that celebrate flavor without excess. I might need some help figuring out the nutritional balance." Raphael considered her for a moment. "I know a sports nutritionist who works with chefs. She might have some insights for you." It wasn't exactly enthusiasm, but coming from Raphael, it was practically a ringing endorsement. Julia nodded, surprised by how much his tentative support meant to her. As the weeks passed, their dynamic shifted subtly. Raphael remained demanding, but there was a new undercurrent of mutual respect. Julia still complained about the early mornings and the protein shakes, but her protests lacked their former bitterness. They had become, if not quite friends, then allies in a shared mission. By the 2-month mark, Julia had lost 23 pounds. The change was becoming visible, her chef's jacket less strained, her face more defined. But the real transformation was happening inside. Her energy levels had surged, her confidence was growing, and for the first time in years, she felt truly present in her body. One Sunday afternoon, when the restaurant was closed, Julia invited Raphael to Harvest for a tasting of her festival menu concepts. It was an impulsive invitation, born partly from professional curiosity and partly from a desire to show him another side of herself, not just the struggling client, but the skilled chef in her element. Raphael arrived precisely on time, dressed in dark jeans and a simple grey Henley, the first time Julia had seen him out of his training gear. He looked different, somehow more human, as he took a seat at the chef's table in the empty restaurant. "I've prepared 3 potential dishes," Julia explained, suddenly nervous under his scrutiny. Each one represents a different approach to balancing flavor and nutrition. The first dish was a play on traditional comfort food: cauliflower risotto with roasted mushrooms and a small amount of aged parmesan. The second featured local trout with a vibrant herb salsa verde. The third was a dessert, a dark chocolate pot de crème made with avocado and coconut milk, topped with a single, perfect raspberry. As Raphael tasted each dish, his usual stoicism gave way to genuine interest. He asked questions about techniques and ingredients, occasionally making notes on his phone. "This is impressive," he said finally, setting down his spoon after the dessert. "You've managed to create dishes that don't feel like compromises." Coming from Raphael, it was high praise indeed. Julia felt a warm flush of pride, different from the validation she usually sought from critics and customers. This was more personal, a recognition of not just her culinary skills, but her adaptability, her willingness to evolve. "I've been thinking about something else too," Julia said, gathering the empty plates. "The festival includes a cooking demonstration. I'm considering sharing some of this journey. How changing my relationship with food has affected my cooking philosophy." Raphael looked up, surprised. "That's very personal." "Yes," Julia agreed. "But maybe that's the point. So many people struggle with this, loving food but needing to find balance. If my story helps someone else, isn't that worth a little vulnerability?" Raphael was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When I got injured," he said finally, "I shut everyone out. I didn't want anyone to see me as anything less than perfect." "It took years before I could talk about it without feeling like a failure." He met her gaze directly. "Don't make that mistake. Your journey, the struggle, not just the triumph, that's what will resonate with people." In that moment, something shifted between them. A wall came down, revealing not just the disciplined trainer and determined client, but two people who understood what it meant to rebuild yourself when life knocked you down. As Raphael left, he paused at the door. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. "We're adding a new element to your training." Julia groaned dramatically, but they both knew it was for show. Whatever challenge came next, she was ready to face it. "Keep your core engaged. 5 more seconds." Raphael's voice cut through the burn in Julia's muscles as she held the plank position, sweat dripping onto her mat. The gym was buzzing with early morning energy, but Julia's focus had narrowed to the count in her head and the steady rhythm of her breathing. time," Raphael announced, and Julia collapsed onto the mat with a theatrical groan. "I think I preferred it when I couldn't do a full plank," she muttered, rolling onto her back. Raphael smirked, offering her a hand up. "No, you didn't. Check your heart rate." Julia glanced at her fitness tracker, 142 BPM, already dropping as her body efficiently recovered. 4 months ago, a session like this would have left her gasping for air, her heart rate spiking dangerously. Now her body responded with a resilience that still surprised her. "Your endurance is improving consistently," Raphael noted, reviewing her stats on his tablet. "How's the back pain?" "Almost gone," Julia admitted. "Just gets a little tight after a long service." Raphael nodded, making a note. "We'll focus on more targeted stretches for your lower back. But first," he pointed to the track that circled the gym's perimeter. 3 laps, steady pace." As Julia began her run, she reflected on how much had changed since that first painful session. She'd lost 41 pounds, dropping from a size 22 to a 16. Her blood pressure had normalized, and her doctor had reduced her pre-diabetic status to low risk. But the numbers told only part of the story. The real transformation was in how she moved through the world, with more energy, more confidence, and a growing sense of possibility. Her restaurant was thriving, partly thanks to the new Mindful Harvest specials that had attracted a different clientele. Even her relationship with her staff had evolved as she'd become more open about her journey, creating a culture of wellness that extended beyond her personal goals. Finishing her laps, Julia returned to find Raphael in conversation with an unfamiliar woman, tall, athletic, with a sleek ponytail and an expensive-looking camera bag slung over her shoulder. "Julia, this is Amber Chen," Raphael introduced them. "She's a photographer specializing in fitness transformations. I mentioned your story to her, and she's interested in documenting your progress for the festival presentation." Julia froze, instinctively crossing her arms over her midsection. "Photos? I don't think—" "Just hear her out," Raphael interrupted gently. "This is your decision, but I think it could be powerful." Amber stepped forward, her manner professional but warm. "I don't do before and after shots that shame people's starting points," she explained. "My work focuses on the journey, capturing authentic moments that show strength, determination, vulnerability. It's about celebrating what bodies can do, not just how they look." Julia hesitated. She'd become more comfortable in her changing body, but the idea of being photographed, of making her transformation so visual and public, triggered a wave of insecurity. Think about it, Amber suggested, handing Julia her business card. No pressure, but for what it's worth, the most meaningful transformations aren't always the most dramatic ones visually. They're the ones that change how people see themselves. After Amber left, Julia turned to Raphael, a question in her eyes. Why did you do that? Set this up without asking me first? Raphael's expression was uncharacteristically uncertain. Because sometimes we need to be pushed outside our comfort zones. And because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, I've seen how you inspire people, Julia. The way you talk about your journey, how you've integrated it into your cooking. That deserves to be shared more widely. It was perhaps the most personal thing he'd ever said to her, and Julia didn't quite know how to respond. There was something in his eyes, a warmth, an admiration that went beyond the professional satisfaction of a trainer seeing results. I'll think about it, she said finally. Later that day, as Julia worked on finalizing her festival menu, her phone buzzed with a text from Raphael. Dinner tonight? There's a new place downtown focused on high-protein Mediterranean. Could be good research for your menu. Julia stared at the message, her heart doing an unexpected little flip. Was this a professional suggestion or something more? And why did the possibility of something more both terrify and exhilarate her? Sure, she typed back before she could overthink it. "7:30? That evening, as Julia changed clothes for the third time, she had to acknowledge the obvious. This felt like a date. She finally settled on dark jeans that showcased her slimmer legs and a deep green blouse that brought out her eyes. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself, not just because of the weight loss, but because of the confidence in her posture, the spark in her expression. The restaurant, Olive and Vine, was buzzing when Julia arrived. Raphael was already seated at a corner table, studying the menu with his usual intensity. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, something like appreciation flickered across his features. "You look nice," he said simply, standing as she took her seat. "Thanks," Julia replied, fighting a blush. "So do you." And he did, dressed in a fitted blue button-down that emphasized his broad shoulders. He looked less like a drill sergeant and more like, well, a man on a date. As they settled into conversation, Julia was struck by how natural it felt to be with Raphael outside the gym. He was still direct, still occasionally intense, but there was a dry humor to him that rarely surfaced during their training sessions. He told her about growing up in a military family, moving from base to base, finding stability in sports and physical discipline. She shared stories about her culinary school disasters and the leap of faith it had taken to open Harvest with her life savings. "You never talk about your injury," Julia observed as they shared a dessert, a single serving of baklava, split precisely in half at Raphael's insistence, "the one that ended your Olympic dreams." Raphael's expression clouded slightly. "Not much to tell. I pushed too hard, ignored the warning signs, paid the price." "That's the what, not the how," Julia pressed gently. "How did you get through it? Rebuild your life?" Raphael was quiet for a long moment, rotating his water glass slowly. "Not well at first," he admitted finally. "I was angry, isolated myself, pushed away anyone who tried to help. I'd defined myself entirely as an athlete, and when that was gone..." He shrugged. "It took me almost 2 years to find my way to personal training, to realize I could channel what I'd learned into helping others." "Is that why you're so tough on your clients? Because no one pushed you when you needed it?" Raphael looked up, surprised by her insight. "Maybe, or maybe because discipline was the only thing that saved me from myself." He hesitated, then added, "You're different, though. You push back. Most clients just do what I tell them or they quit. You challenge me." "Is that a good thing?" Julia asked, smiling slightly. "It is for you," Raphael replied, holding her gaze. "And maybe for me too." The evening ended with an awkward moment outside the restaurant, a hesitation between a handshake and something more intimate, finally resolved when Julia impulsively leaned in for a quick hug. Raphael returned it stiffly at first, then with a surprising gentleness that lingered in Julia's mind long after they'd said goodnight. The next morning at the gym, there was a new awareness between them, an undercurrent of something unresolved. They moved through her training session with professional focus, but Julia caught Raphael watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher when he thought she wasn't looking. As they were wrapping up, Julia made her decision. "I'll do it," she said abruptly, "the photo documentation with Amber for the festival presentation." Raphael looked up, surprised. "What changed your mind?" Julia considered the question seriously. "Something you said last night about discipline saving you from yourself. I've been thinking about what saved me, and it wasn't just the exercise or the diet changes. It was learning to see myself differently. Maybe these photos can help someone else do that too." Raphael's smile was small but genuine. "I think you're right." Over the next few weeks, Amber became a regular presence in Julia's life, photographing her training sessions with Raphael, documenting her work in the kitchen, capturing quiet moments of meal prep and menu planning. Initially self-conscious, Julia gradually became more comfortable with the camera's presence, even beginning to appreciate how the photos revealed aspects of her transformation she hadn't fully acknowledged. There was Julia, executing a perfect deadlift, her face a study in determination. Julia experimenting with flavor profiles in her kitchen, fully absorbed in her craft. Julia leading her kitchen staff through a busy service, confident and in command. None of these images focused on her body shape. Instead, they captured her strength, her passion, her growing self-assurance. As the festival drew closer, Julia's preparations intensified. The menu was finalized, her demonstration planned, her team prepared. Everything was coming together professionally, but personally, Julia felt increasingly confused about her relationship with Raphael. Their training sessions had evolved into something more complex, still focused and challenging, but threaded with a warmth and understanding that hadn't been there before. They'd shared several more research dinners, each one feeling less like professional development and more like a date, yet neither of them had explicitly acknowledged the shift. One evening, 2 weeks before the festival, Raphael surprised Julia by showing up at harvest just as closing service ended. He found her in the kitchen, reviewing notes for her festival demonstration. "I brought you something," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant as he placed a small box on the counter. A pre-festival gift, or maybe a milestone marker. Curious, Julia opened the box to find a sleek chef's knife with a perfectly balanced handle. Engraved on the blade were the words, "Transform, don't surrender." "It's beautiful," Julia said softly, testing the knife's weight in her hand. "But I don't understand. What's the milestone?" Raphael took a deep breath. "6 months ago today, you walked into my gym for the first time. You've lost 57 pounds, gained significant muscle mass, reversed your pre-diabetic indicators, and completely transformed your approach to cooking. By any measure, you've succeeded." He paused, then added quietly, "Which means, technically, you don't need me anymore." Julia looked up sharply, suddenly understanding. Their training contract had been for 6 months, designed to get her ready for the festival. In the whirlwind of preparation, she'd completely forgotten that their professional relationship had an expiration date. "What if I still want you in my life?" she asked, the words out before she could second-guess them. Raphael's expression softened. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I'd like to be in your life too, not as your trainer, but—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "As something else." Odile, the space between them seemed charged with possibility, months of unspoken feelings finally finding their way to the surface. Slowly, deliberately, Raphael reached out, his hand covering hers on the counter. "I've never crossed this line with a client before," he admitted, "but you stopped being just a client to me a long time ago, Julia." Julia felt her heart racing, faster than during any training session. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Raphael smiled, the rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Now, Chef Hayes, I think it's time for you to call the shots for a change." And as Julia moved around the counter toward him, she realized that perhaps the most significant transformation of the past 6 months wasn't physical at all. It was finding the courage to pursue what she wanted without fear holding her back. The morning of the Portland Culinary Festival dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows of Julia's apartment as she performed her final pre-event ritual, trying on her chef's whites. The tailored jacket, purchased new for the occasion, fit perfectly, skimming over her transformed body without clinging or gaping. 6 months ago, this moment would have been fraught with anxiety and self-criticism. Today, as Julia buttoned the jacket and adjusted the collar, she felt only a calm readiness. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, a text from Raphael. "You've got this. I'll be there at 1 p.m. to help set up. Breathe." Julia smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. In the 3 weeks since their relationship had shifted from professional to personal, Raphael had revealed a surprisingly tender side beneath his disciplined exterior. He was still direct, still occasionally intense, but there was a softness to him now, at least with her, that few people ever saw. Gathering her notes and recipe cards, Julia headed to her car. The festival venue, Portland's sprawling convention center, was already bustling with activity when she arrived. Chefs from across the Pacific Northwest were setting up booths, testing equipment, and arranging elaborate displays. As a featured chef, Julia had been assigned a prime location, a demonstration kitchen with audience seating at the heart of the exhibition hall. Miguel and her Sue team were already there, unpacking ingredients and organizing the prep station with practiced efficiency. Behind them, a large screen was being set up for Julia's presentation, the photo story that Amber had compiled documenting her transformation journey. "Chef, where do you want these?" Miguel asked, holding up a tray of carefully portioned vegetables. Julia directed him to the prep counter, then paused to take in the scene. 6 months of hard work, discipline, and reinvention had led to this moment. Not just the physical transformation, though losing 62 pounds was certainly a remarkable achievement, but the evolution of her entire approach to food and cooking. Mindful Harvest had grown from a personal experiment into a philosophy that infused every aspect of her restaurant. At precisely 1 p.m., Raphael arrived, dressed in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, rather than his usual training gear. He moved through the chaos with quiet confidence, immediately assessing what needed to be done and jumping in to help without being asked. Julia watched him charming her staff, testing the microphone setup, conferring with the technical team about the presentation, all while sending her reassuring glances that somehow calmed the butterflies in her stomach. 10 minutes to doors opening, the event coordinator announced, sweeping through the hall. Final checks, everyone. Julia gathered her team for a brief huddle. We've practiced this menu a dozen times, she reminded them. Trust your training, trust each other, and remember why we're here, to show that healthy food can be just as satisfying, just as joyful as anything else. She met each of their eyes in turn. Let's do this. As the doors opened and attendees began flooding into the hall, Julia took a moment to center herself. She caught Raphael's eye across the bustling space, and he gave her a subtle nod, their private signal that had evolved during training sessions. You've got this. I believe in you. The demonstration was scheduled for 3 p.m., giving festival goers time to explore the various booths and tastings first. Julia's station offered small samples of her featured dishes, the cauliflower risotto that had become a signature at Harvest, a citrus-cured sustainable salmon with pickled fennel, and miniature versions of her avocado chocolate pot de crème. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Julia overheard snippets of conversation as people tasted her food. "Wait, this is healthy? And I can't believe there's no cream in this. And we need to get reservations at Harvest." As the afternoon progressed, a crowd began gathering around the demonstration kitchen. Julia spotted familiar faces, regular customers, local food critics, even her doctor, who gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up from the third row. Raphael had positioned himself at the back, his tall frame easy to spot even in the crowded hall. At precisely 3 p.m., the festival director introduced Julia to enthusiastic applause. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the small stage, adjusting her microphone with steady hands. "Food has always been my greatest love affair," she began, her voice clear and confident. "As a chef, I've spent my life exploring flavors, textures, techniques, always searching for that perfect bite, that moment of culinary transcendence." She smiled, scanning the attentive faces before her. "But about 6 months ago, I had to confront an uncomfortable truth. My passion for food was slowly killing me." A murmur rippled through the audience. Julia continued, her voice gathering strength as she shared her story. The back pain that had been her wake-up call, the difficult first steps toward change, the gradual discovery that healthy eating didn't have to mean culinary compromise. Behind her, the screen displayed Amber's photographs: Julia in the kitchen, Julia training with Raphael, Julia shopping at farmers markets, Julia testing recipes. The images told a story not just of weight loss, but of a woman reclaiming her vitality, her confidence, her joy. "The biggest misconception about healthy eating," Julia explained as she began assembling the first demonstration dish, "is that it requires sacrifice. That flavor and satisfaction must be traded for nutrition." Her hands moved with practiced precision as she seared local scallops to a perfect golden brown. But what I've discovered is that mindful cooking, paying attention to where our food comes from, how it's prepared, and how it nourishes us, actually enhances flavor. It forces us to rely on the inherent qualities of ingredients rather than masking them with excess fat and sugar. As Julia cooked, she wove together culinary techniques with the personal insights she'd gained during her transformation. She spoke about learning to honor hunger and fullness cues, about finding joy in movement, about the surprising parallels between physical training and culinary discipline. Both require patience, she noted, carefully plating her finished dish. Both demand that you trust the process even when results aren't immediately visible. And both teach you that true mastery comes not from controlling everything, but from working with the natural properties of your materials, whether that's a human body or a perfect heirloom tomato. This earned appreciative laughter from the audience. Julia glanced up to find Raphael watching her, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal. Their eyes held for a brief moment before she returned her attention to the demonstration. For the finale, Julia invited a volunteer from the audience to help her prepare a simplified version of her avocado chocolate dessert. The woman who stepped forward, middle-aged, hesitant, visibly carrying extra weight, reminded Julia painfully of herself 6 months earlier. "What's your name?" Julia asked warmly. "Diane," the woman replied, her voice barely audible. "Well, Diane, have you ever made a dessert without sugar or dairy before?" Diane shook her head, looking skeptical. "Then we're about to blow your mind," Julia promised, guiding her through the process with gentle encouragement. As they worked side by side, Julia could see Diane's confidence growing. By the time they offered samples to the front row of the audience, Diane was beaming with accomplishment, and the crowd's enthusiastic reaction to the dessert only heightened her pride. "This is what mindful harvest means to me," Julia concluded, her arm around Diane's shoulders. Not deprivation, but discovery. Not restriction, but reinvention. It's about finding new ways to honor our love of food while also honoring our body's need for nourishment and care. The applause was thunderous. As Julia thanked the audience and began answering questions, she felt a profound sense of completion, not just of a successful presentation, but of a chapter in her life. The journey wasn't over. Maintaining her new lifestyle would be a lifelong commitment. But she had proven to herself that transformation was possible, that change didn't have to mean loss. Later, as the festival wound down and vendors began packing up their displays, Julia found a quiet moment with Raphael in a secluded corner of the now empty demonstration kitchen. "You were incredible," he said, his usually reserved demeanor softened with admiration. "The way you connected with that woman, Diane, you could see her whole perspective changing as you worked with her." Julia smiled, leaning against the counter. I saw myself in her, all that potential, just waiting for permission to emerge. She looked up at Raphael, studying his face. That's what you did for me, you know. Gave me permission to believe I could change. Raphael shook his head slightly. No, Julia. I gave you structure, maybe some accountability. But the permission, the belief, that came from you. It was always in you. Before she could respond, Miguel appeared in the doorway. Chef, Food and Wine wants an interview, and I've got 3 restaurant owners asking about potential collaborations. Julia nodded. Tell them I'll be right there. As Miguel disappeared, she turned back to Raphael. Duty calls. Raphael smiled, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. Go. Shine. I'll be here when you're done. As Julia moved to leave, he caught her hand, pulling her back for a moment. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you are, how you've taken this journey and made it entirely your own. Julia felt tears threatening, happy tears, grateful tears. We're just getting started, she promised, giving his hand a squeeze before heading back into the bustling hall, ready to embrace whatever came next. Hours later, as the last of the festival attendees trickled out and the cleaning crew began their work, Julia and Raphael sat at an empty tasting table, sharing a single portion of her award-winning dessert. The Mindful Harvest concept had won Best Innovation, and 3 different investors had approached her about expanding the restaurant concept to other locations. So what now? Raphael asked, watching as Julia savored a small spoonful of the chocolate creation. Now, Julia considered the question, looking around at the dismantled booths and empty displays. Now we keep going. I have a restaurant to run, new recipes to develop, possibly an expansion to plan. She smiled, meeting his gaze directly. And a relationship to explore. Raphael reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. I like the sound of that. Although, Julia added with a mischievous smile, I'm going to need a new personal trainer. My last one developed some serious boundary issues. Raphael laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. I might know someone, very disciplined, somewhat intense, completely captivated by a certain chef. As they left the convention center hand in hand, stepping into the cool evening air, Julia felt a profound sense of gratitude. 6 months ago, she'd embarked on this journey, hoping merely to improve her health enough to survive a culinary festival. She'd achieved that goal, and so much more. Finding strength she didn't know she possessed, reinventing her approach to her craft, and opening herself to connection and vulnerability in ways she'd never imagined. The transformation from obese to fit was visible in her body, but the more meaningful changes were invisible. The newfound confidence, the balanced relationship with food, the willingness to risk failure in pursuit of growth. These were the true victories, the ones that would sustain her long after the festival accolades faded. As Raphael's arm slipped around her waist, Julia leaned into him, savoring the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to practice the mindfulness she'd worked so hard to cultivate. But tonight was for celebration of the journey completed and the journey just beginning. "You know," Julia said thoughtfully as they walked toward the parking lot, "I'm thinking of adding a new section to the harvest menu, something that tells this story, not just my personal transformation, but the philosophy behind it." Raphael nodded encouragingly. "What would you call it?" Julia considered for a moment, then smiled. "Transform, don't surrender." She glanced up at him. "I know a guy who gave me a knife with that engraved on it once. Pretty good advice, as it turns out." Raphael's arm tightened around her, his smile visible even in the gathering dusk. "The best transformations," he said softly, "are the ones we choose for ourselves, and the ones we don't face alone." As they reached her car, Julia turned to face him fully, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm not alone anymore," she said simply. "And neither are you." In the warm glow of the streetlights, as Raphael bent to kiss her, Julia knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this connection, this hard-won peace with herself, was the most satisfying culmination she could have imagined for her journey from obese to fit, from isolation to belonging, from fear to courage. Not an ending, but a beginning, rich with possibility, balanced with wisdom, and seasoned with joy.